Well, hello, cutie. I'm back. And today we are finally doing another episode of Beauty and the Bibliophile. And we're talking about Star Wars. If you're new here, welcome to my channel and welcome to the Cute Life. I'm your cult leader, Leah. If you're not new here, thank you for returning for another cult meeting. On Wednesdays, some Wednesdays, I do my best to do a series that I call Beauty and the Bibliophile, where I do my makeup and I tell you about the latest book that I've read. If you don't know what a bibliophile is, it is a lover and collector of books like me. Today's book is Princess and the Scoundrel. It's a Star Wars book, and it is written by Beth Revis, and this came out in 2022, so it is fairly new. I have never read a Star Wars book before. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. It was part of my childhood growing up, like on the regular. My parents were so into it that they named me after Princess Leia. Now, if anyone understands the Leia debacle, you'll understand why my name is spelled L-E-I-A, but it's pronounced Leia. But we're pronouncing her name in the story, Princess Leia, L-E-I-A. If you know, you know. Anyway, this was a very enjoyable book. I'm so glad I read it. It was very fun, and I can't wait to tell you all about it while I do my makeup. But first, I wanted you to know that if you have not seen any of the Star Wars movies, well, first of all, what is your problem? Second of all, you're gonna wanna watch those before you either read this book or listen to this summary, because you're gonna not be able to follow some of this stuff. So anyway, make sure and do that. And second of all, spoiler alerts. If you're thinking about reading this book and you don't want to know anything about it, don't watch this video. If you're thinking about reading the book, maybe you're on the fence about it, maybe you're not sure, you just want to get a synopsis of it, go ahead and watch this video. I do talk a lot about the book. You will know the ending, but I do have to leave a lot out for the sake of time. So, if you want to hear a summary of Princess and the Scoundrel and watch me do my makeup at the same time, stay tuned. So, this book starts immediately after the Return of the Jedi. Everyone is still in the Ewok village. Everyone is still celebrating the destruction of the Death Star and the fall of the Empire. Now, during the celebration, Luke comes to Leia and he tells her that he can sense that the Force is strong with her, and he wants her to come and train with him in the ways of the Force. Now, Leia, she's intrigued by this because she has also sensed the Force working within her. And she is curious, like, what could that mean for her? But at the same time, she's a little torn because she knows she should probably, stick around and help with the formation of the new Republic to make sure that, the Empire doesn't rise back into power. So she tells Luke that she'll think about it. And then later, Han comes to her and asks her to marry him. And again, Leia is feeling torn between Luke's offer, helping to set up the new Republic, and now following her heart and marrying Han. But eventually, after some discussions and some time alone in the forest, she decides that she's gonna follow her heart and she's gonna marry Han. So they have a wedding ceremony right there in the Ewok village, and then for their honeymoon, which is actually, it's kind of difficult for everyone to convince Leia that she needs to take a honeymoon instead of just getting straight back to work. They decide to go on a honeymoon, and they decide to take their honeymoon on a luxury cruise vessel called the Halcyon. Now, if you're a Star Wars fan or a Disney fan at all, you're going to recognize this name, the Halcyon, because the Halcyon is actually a place you can go. There's a hotel out in Disney World called, I think it's called, everyone just refers to it as the Star Wars Hotel. I think it's called technically something else, but that's what everyone calls it. And it's like a little resort excursion thing, and you're supposed to be on a luxury cruise vessel that's going through the galaxy, and the ship that you're supposedly on is called the Halcyon. Okay, I'm gonna let my skincare set in for a few minutes before we move on to makeup. So when Han and Leia get to the Halcyon, the press is there. And they're there to cover the maiden voyage of the Halcyon since the Empire's dissolution. The original intention of the Halcyon was to be a luxury cruise vessel, but when the Empire found out that there was this new state-of-the-art impressive ship, they came and they took control of it, and they put war guns on it and claimed it as their own. But now that the Empire has been destroyed, the original owners of the Halcyon have returned it to its original intent, was to be a cruise vessel to take tourists around the galaxy and to make people happy. Now the press was there because they heard that General Leia Organa had gotten married in secret and that she was going to be on her honeymoon on the Halcyon. And they all wanted to get a picture of her on her honeymoon with her new husband. Now, Leia, having grown up in the public eye, she was brought up a princess. She was used to the press being around. She knew how to kind of even work the press a little bit to her advantage, get, messages of the rebellion out. But Han, he does not like the press. In fact, he doesn't like this whole luxury lifestyle cruise vacation thing at all. It's just not his bag. He's just not into this scene. He would have rather taken the Falcon out to the middle of nowhere and just hung out on his ship with his new wife. And Leia, she could have gone for that too. When it comes to luxury stuff, she's the kind of take it or leave it. She's used to being around it, so it doesn't bother her. But at the same time, she's perfectly comfortable doing something less fancy. But this excursion on the Halcyon was a gift from Mon Mothma, who's the leader of the Rebel Alliance. And kind of hard to say no to something like that. And who knows? Maybe it could be fun. They thought, well, let's just make the best of it and we'll go on this trip. Now, everyone's eyes were on Leia. Everybody wanted to talk to her, not for any genuine reason, but because of her title. Everyone wanted not necessarily to talk to her, they made small talk or whatever, but what they really wanted was to be seen talking to her, right? All super fake. And this annoyed Han to no end how fake everyone was being, except for Leia, of course. She was being very genuine. She would take her time to talk to people, regardless of their intentions. So Han decides to let Leia do her thing, and he's gonna go to the lounge and get a drink. And while he's there, he notices some people playing sabacc, which is a card game. And he's kind of watching, and when they notice him watching, they're like, oh, do you want to play with us? And he's like, oh, okay, what are the bets? How much are you betting? And they're like, oh, well, we're just playing for fun. And he's like, and he doesn't want to play, I guess, unless there's stakes involved. So one of the players tells him, well, maybe you'll want to go see somebody named Lix. And this person tells him that licks can usually be found in the engineering room. So Han, he's familiar with ships. He figured out where the engineering room was, and he goes inside, and behind some big machines, he sees a card game going on. And the dealer looks up and they're like, how'd you get in here? And he was like, well, the door was open. And the dealer kind of rolls their eyes like somebody there left the door open. And he's like, well, you got credits? And Han is like, yeah. And so he's like, okay, you can play. So he sits down, and across from him is a man named Kilad, I think is how you pronounce his name. And he's very kind of twitchy and nervous and talkative. And he's just like jabber-jawing, kind of annoying everyone else at the table. Now he mentions to Han that he used to work for the Empire on ship tech. And when Han hears this, his blood starts to boil. He worked for the Empire. He helped probably in some way to kill some of his friends that had died in the war. And it was very hard for Han to control his emotions, but he did. Now back to Leia. She finally finished up with talking to everyone, and she went to her cabin because she knew there was a message waiting there for her. And the message was from Prime Minister Yen's of a moon called Madurs, I believe is how you pronounce it. They're not real places, so I'm not gonna be too concerned. Anyway, Madurs. She had gotten a message from the Prime Minister there, and this excited her because she had sent out a bunch of messages to a bunch of different worlds asking them to join the newly forming republic. And she had already gotten back a message from the Prime Minister of this moon that was, it was an aquatic moon, you know, made of water, but it was a frozen moon, so everything there was ice. Anyway, she was excited to get the message back because she thought, oh, I mean, he responded pretty quickly, so he's probably into this. He'll probably want to join the new republic. Because, I mean, if he didn't, he probably just wouldn't have even returned her message altogether. And she was very excited, and part of her actually kind of wanted to take a shuttle and go to Madurs to speak with him face to face so that she could probably better convince him. But, I mean, she was supposed to be on her honeymoon, not an ambassador mission. But she wondered if maybe, could it be both? Now, back at the card game with Han, Kilad said that he should probably stop playing because he didn't have a lot of money now that he wasn't working for the Empire anymore. And Han was like, well, since you're not working for them anymore, what are you gonna do now? And he told Han that he was going to try and sell some of his inventions that involved gravity manipulation, since that's what he used to work on for the Empire. And he was actually on this cruise to meet with a potential buyer. Now Han was thinking to himself, he's like, who would want to buy anything related to gravity manipulation except someone connected with the Empire? Now, Kilad, still being a chatty Cathy, tells everyone at the table that he heard Princess Leia was on the ship. And he was surprised that someone like her would be making such public appearances. You know, there's gotta be some pretty big bounties on her head. And he was like, kind of half joking, like, oh, well, maybe I don't need to. Bubs! What's the matter? Sorry. Anyway, Kilad was kind of half joking and saying, you know, maybe I don't need a buyer for my inventions. I noticed where the escape pods were and how easy it would be to just grab her and throw her in one of those things and then go down to the nearest planet and turn her in for a bounty. Now Han is listening to all this, and he's, you know, it's very difficult for him to keep his composure while he listens to this man talk about kidnapping his wife. But he decides to go ahead and let him talk. Sometimes that's the best way to go about things. And he's like, oh really, why don't you show me these escape pods? And Keylad, thinking, oh man, this dude, he's like interested in this plot. Maybe he could help him and they could get some money. And he's like, okay, he's like, you think it's possible? You think we could actually do this? And Han's like, maybe, show me these, you know, escape pods. So they go to the escape pods. Han tells Keylad, he's like, get inside. He's like, let me see, you know, how much room there is for this. Let me get a feel for it. And so he gets inside, and when he does, Han hits this button next to the, like a little control panel, and it slams the door shut. And you know, it's an escape pod. It's meant to go out into space, so it's very sealed, and you can barely hear Keylad screaming to be let out. And that's when Han tells him that, you know, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if he just let an escape pod float out into space with someone in it who was thinking about kidnapping the princess. Now, back at the room, Leia checked her message from the Prime Minister. And he said that he was very happy to have heard from Princess Leia, that he was excited to hear that she was interested in their renowned art. That's kind of what their moon was famous for. She had mentioned in her message to him how much she admired the art of his moon, more as a way to, you know, flatter and open the lines of communication. But he said, you know, if you want to truly appreciate art, you need to experience it for yourself. And he invited her to come to their moon to experience it, that they were getting ready to have an exhibition, and it was their first one since the Empire had some sort of art exposition there, and he was excited to have her. And that's it. That's all he said. He didn't say anything about any of the points that Leia had brought up about, you know, the dissolution of the Empire and about them possibly joining the New Republic. That was it. Now back to Han. He's got Keylad trapped in the escape pod, and all of a sudden a worker comes in. He's an engineer, and he's like, what are you doing back here? Passengers aren't supposed to be back here. And then he notices Keylad trapped in the escape pod, so he lets him out. And then this guy's boss shows up, and he's like, what's going on here? And Han explains to them that this guy was talking about kidnapping Princess Leia, my wife. And then the two workers, they realize who he is. And he's like, they're like, oh, General Solo, we're so sorry about all this. They start apologizing profusely, and they turn to Keylad and they're like, what cabin are you in? But he doesn't have an answer. He's a stowaway. So they grab this guy and they take him to the Briggs, and they tell Han that, again, they're so sorry. Go back to your room, enjoy the rest of your vacation. The captain's gonna deal with this guy. I forgot I'm supposed to be doing my makeup. So the next day, Han and Leia, they go to talk to the captain of the ship. Han wants to talk to him about Keylad, and Leia wants to talk to him because she desperately wants to go to Madur's, but it's not on their itinerary. So she's wondering if maybe she can convince him to turn the ship around and go in the opposite direction, even though there's all these tourists on this ship that are expecting to go to a planet called Sinjax, which is like a tropical planet. So they're talking to him, but he's like, oh, no, there's no way that we can turn the ship around. And then Leia kind of starts, you know, bringing up how they're going to have to pass this very dangerous meteor shower in order to get to Sinjax. And Han is catching what she's putting down. And so he helps kind of manipulate and convince the captain to turn the ship around and go to Madur's instead of Sinjax. So Leia and Han, they go back to their cabin. And they ended up having a little bit of a fight because Han feels like she's working too much. They're on their honeymoon and she hasn't been paying very much attention to him because she's been all caught up in Mardours and publicity and all this stuff, which is part of her job. So she feels like he should understand that he knew that about her before he proposed, and yeah, he should understand. Now, Leia ends up storming out, but she feels kind of bad because Han did have her back with the whole captain thing that happened. She hadn't told him anything about what she was gonna try and do. He just kind of took her side, not even knowing what she was trying to do. He just backed her up. He didn't know like what kind of con she was trying to pull off, and he didn't question it. He was just there for her. And that's what a real partner does. And Leia, again, she feels bad. She's not really used to this kind of a relationship. She's always kind of compartmentalized her relationships as a way to kind of protect herself emotionally when she lost people in this war that she's been fighting basically her whole life. But she couldn't do that with Han. You can't do that with your life partner. She goes back to the room and they end up making up, and he tells her, you know, no matter how much you push me away, I'm always gonna come back. And then we have a fade to black situation. So the next day, the Halcyon begins shuttling tourists down to Mardours. Now, some of the tourists are very upset about this. They packed for a tropical climate after all. But of course, you know, the cruise line provided them with the needed proper attire. And when Leia and Han got down there, they thought it was very beautiful. Cold, but beautiful. And Han actually was very surprised that he actually did like the planet. He was expecting a planet like Hoth that was very cold, but windy and hostile. But here it was cold, but it was a silent, still cold. And in fact, it almost kind of reminded him of being trapped in carbonite. Now, a welcome committee arrived, and they showed up in these regal sleds that were being pulled by these giant, white, beautiful beasts. So Leia and Han climbed into one, and then their guide took them to where a very grand ice palace was. And on their way, Leia noticed off in the distance some other, what looked like ice palaces, but they were more like run down. They were more like ice palace ruins. And she asked their driver, she's like, well, what's that over there? And the driver kind of got a sad look on her face, and she was like, oh, that's the old city. She was like, that's the nature of our art though. It's ice, it's not permanent, but that's what makes it even more beautiful. Then Leia noticed something else. Near the ruins was a tall black tower, and she asked their driver again. She's like, oh, what's that? But the driver didn't really answer her. All she said was, oh, it's too dangerous to go over there. And then they pulled up to their destination. When they got there, a man came up to them and he's like, oh, I'm going to escort you to the Prime Minister. He's very eager to meet you. And as they're, coming into the reception hall of this palace, Leia asks him, she says, how do you guys keep your ice palaces warm and them not melt? And the guy's like, oh, we have a mineral here called carnium, and it allows them to heat their palaces without it melting, and they can use it to fuel their underwater vessels and shuttles. Then the Prime Minister walks up and he introduces himself, and that he's, very excited to meet her, and he's so glad that she came. And she's like, oh yeah, we're excited too. I can't wait to talk to you about joining the new, and he cuts her off and he's like, no. He's like, you're not here on a diplomatic mission. He's like, You're here to enjoy the art and the natural beauty of our world. He's let's not mar this with politics. And she starts to bring it up again, but again he cuts her off and he's just like, no, now's the time for drinking. And he gives her like a drink. And this guy, he's just coming off very pretentious. And Han and Leia are just like kind of turned off by this guy, especially Han, because he keeps interrupting his wife. Now, Han and Leia, they kind of gave each other the eye, and they're kind of like, they think that, you know, they understand what the real message this guy is sending, which is now is not a safe time to talk. And they're kind of looking around the reception hall. There's all these, you know, elite types around, and they don't see anybody in imperial uniforms, but that doesn't mean that the Empire is not there. So the Prime Minister takes Han and Leia on a tour of the palace, but Leia is getting a little frustrated. She wants to talk business, and so she finally just flat out asks him if Mordors would join the New Republic. And he flat out refuses. He says that Mordors doesn't need anybody or anything. Now Han, being annoyed at this guy and how he is talking to his wife, he flat out asks them about the Black Tower. And at first, the Prime Minister acts like he doesn't know what he's talking about. But after Han presses him some more, he admits that about a year ago, the Empire had shown up there on their moon, and they wanted to strike up some kind of deal to get their carnium. And at first, the Prime Minister entertained their idea, but that after a while, he just refused them. And so they packed up their stuff and left. And that tower was an abandoned station that they had intended to use to mine the carnium, but then when the deal didn't work out, they just abandoned it. Then, right then, when they finished their conversation, the ground began to shake under their feet and under the ice. And all of the tourists started screaming, and the Prime Minister was shouting out, he's like, oh, no, it's okay. It's just one of the underground quakes. They're very harmless, nothing to worry about. Then the Prime Minister kind of takes Leia by the elbow, and he steers her into another part of the reception hall. And there's a bunch of press there. And she looks at him and she's like, oh, I didn't know we were having a press conference. I wasn't really prepared for that. And he looks at her and he was like, well, maybe you're not as savvy of a politician as I thought you were. Again, so rude and stuck up. Anyway, so the reporters, they all start kind of asking questions about the art exposition that's coming up and what Leia thinks of the frozen moon. And then Leia announces that the Prime Minister has so graciously offered to take her on a tour of the Ice Palace ruins. And he kind of shoots her a look, but of course he can't let on that, you know, this wasn't planned. He doesn't want the press to think he doesn't have control of the situation. So he's like, oh yes, we're going to take them on a tour. Now, before they go on this tour of the Ice Palace ruins, the Prime Minister, and it's just not Han and Leia, it's Han and Leia and a bunch of the other tourists from the Halcyon. And he insists that he also wants to take them on a tour of their fishing villages. So they go to these fishing villages to like a dock area, and under the dock there's an area that you can go into, like a big glass bubble under the water, so you can observe the fishermen swimming through the water with their nets and just see how they do their fishing. And so they're under there, and it's very impressive what the fishermen can do. But then Han and Leia notice, kind of off away from everybody else, they see an area in the distance under the water that's not as teeming with life as the area that everyone has their attention on. And Leia is kind of squinting through the glass, and she can see off in the distance a black protruding large object kind of coming down under the ice. And she can tell just by, you know, positioning that this thing under the ice is directly underneath the black tower that they had gone by. So Han and Leia are looking at each other like, And then they also notice that there are some very obvious security feeds watching everybody. Now, after the fishing village tour, the Prime Minister took everyone to another art exhibition at the main palace. And then after that, he had a banquet waiting for everyone. So by the time this was done, it was too dark and cold to go over to the palace ruins. Now, Han, the whole time, was telling Leia, he's never going to take us there, he's never going to take us there. He expected this. But then he was also kind of starting to think that maybe them seeing all these things that, you know, he was not going to talk about, all these things they weren't supposed to see or question, were maybe kind of on purpose. Like, he totally could have arranged things so that they never saw these things. Like, when they landed their shuttles, he could have picked them up in a different area so that they would have never seen the ice palaces or the Black Tower. And again, why did he have to take them under the observation area underwater where they would see the same Black Tower but beneath the ice? So they're starting to think that maybe this wasn't, you know, them seeing these things wasn't an accident. Now the next morning, Leia asked the Prime Minister if her and Han could take a sled out on their own, kind of like a little, you know, honeymoon romantic thing. And to their surprise, he said yes, and that in fact he would even drive them himself. So he gets them in the sled, and again, to their shock, he takes them straight to the Ice Palace ruins and the Black Tower. And when he gets to like the base of these ruins, he stops the sled, and Han and Leia can see that it's not just a few palaces that are in ruins, but actually an entire city. And he turns to them and he says, you know, our little moon here, our only, you know, claim to fame is our art. So when the Empire showed up here, he was thinking to himself, what does the Empire want with art? And Han was like, yeah, what do they want? And he says, not a damn thing. Now Leia knew that the Empire was only interested in their carnium because they could use it for fuel. Then the Prime Minister tells them that, you know, it's not safe to go beyond this point because the quakes hit stronger there because the ice is thinner there, which is why they had evacuated the city in the first place. And Leia's like, well, is it unstable here because of that Black Tower? And he turns to her and he says, obviously. Jeez. Then he looks at his watch and he's like, well, we better get going. And after they had been riding away for a few minutes, another quake hit. And Leia realized that these were kind of happening on a schedule, and that the Prime Minister knew that because he looked at his watch and like, oh, we better get going. Now back at the Ice Palace, Han and Leia got to talking and they're like, we need to get a closer look at that Black Tower, both above and below the ice. So they decided they were going to go back to the shuttle that had brought them from the Halcyon to the moon, because they knew that on that shuttle there would be emergency evacuation supplies. Now, the shuttle was designed to, you know, take people from the vessel up in orbit down to planets. So the evacuation supplies would be something that people could use to survive in the void of space. They had thermal discs that they called, these things that they would wear that would keep their core warm, and little apparatuses for breathing. These things were designed for human beings or any type of carbon-based creature to survive the cold of space, which is much colder than the waters on this moon. So they figured we can use these items to survive underwater. So they take these things and they find a split in the ice and they jump in. So the closer they swam to the station, the warmer the water was getting. So they realized that this station is like completely changing the climate of not just the water, but eventually it would be the whole planet. They also noticed red blinking lights around the perimeter of this station, which were security cameras. And they noticed viewports around the perimeter as well. And inside, through them, they could see people in Imperial uniforms and stormtroopers like walking back and forth. They could see people working and droids working, which means this station was not abandoned. It was fully operational. They also saw that the shape of this station was like a cone shape, like a child's top or a drill. It was designed to penetrate the core of this moon. Then the base of it started to glow red, and they knew that this meant they were about to fire. They must have miscalculated when the next quake was going to be, or they changed their schedule, one or the other. Now, it had just been by pure luck that nobody had seen them out there. None of the Imperial workers or the stormtroopers had noticed them there floating in the water. And now, with this machine getting ready to blast, it seemed, they needed to either make a swim for it or get closer to the station and hold on. Han figured it would be safer to cling to the side of the station like a Mainoc, and he grabbed Leia and pulled her towards the station and held on. Now, the red glow turned to a bright white, and it was focusing its energy right into the center, the core of this moon. And the blast was so powerful that the whole station kind of like shifted and then bounced back into place. Now, Han guessed that this station was using some kind of a tractor beam to keep it in place, because he noticed around the perimeter of the station there was a few meters where there was no ice, and it was far too heavy to float. So the station must have been using some sort of gravity manipulation against the same core that it was blasting. So the station was alternating between blasting the core and then using the tractor beam to put the station back into place, kind of causing like a push and pull situation that was disrupting the entire environment. So Han and Leia are clinging to the side of the station as everything's like, you know, it's a quake, like they're feeling above ground. And then it stopped just as abruptly as it started. Then they saw something rising up from the bottom of the ocean up towards them, and it was silvery and sparkly. And they realized it was fish, thousands of them. They were all dead and just like floating up to the surface. And they weren't sure, was it, you know, the blast that killed them or just the rising temperature of the water. And there was also like, you know, rocks and coral and other debris also rising up. And Han like reached out and he grabbed this little red tendril that had been floating there. It was carnium. And then all of a sudden all these little submersion droids came floating through the water and sucking up all these little red tendrils of this precious metal. Now the droids were super small, so they worked on sensors, not visuals. So they didn't see Han and Leia, but they were thinking, you know, I think it's time to get out of here. So they made their way back to the surface. And when they got up there, Han was like, you know, this moon, it can't survive much more of this. And Leia agreed with him, and she's like, no, it can't. The Empire was just going to, you know, completely drain this planet of all its resources and then just leave it behind the shell. Leia was so frustrated. She was so tired of always having to fight. Every little victory they got was met with more fighting, more loss. Every time she tried to do more or to be more, it was just met with more heartbreak. It seemed like this callous universe was just reveling and watching her struggle. And she was trying so hard to hold on to hope, not just for herself, but for the whole galaxy. But I mean, what was she getting for it? She had nothing to show for it, and at least that's the way she looked at it. So they decided that they needed help. So they ran back to the shuttles where they had, gotten the emergency evacuation supplies, and they were going to contact the Halcyon and talk to the captain. But they also knew they couldn't tell the captain that the Empire was there because he would immediately want to evacuate the tourists. They knew that he would be very concerned with the optics of the situation, and he would, leave Mordors on their own to figure it out for themselves until the planet literally split apart. So they decided to ask for an engineer. They thought maybe an engineer could help them figure out how to dismantle the Empire's station. And they also thought maybe an engineer might understand how to convince the Halcyon's captain to help. So they contacted the Halcyon's captain and asked for the engineer. They told him that there was something wrong with one of their shuttles. But the captain said that, he ran diagnostics and he couldn't see anything wrong with any of the shuttles. And so then Leia, in the background, she starts destroying the shuttle that they're on. And the captain, he's like, notices now there is some sort of destruction or something wrong with one of these shuttles. So he's like, oh, my bad. I'll send an engineer right away. So Han and Leia, they run back to where the Prime Minister is. They're hoping maybe there's something that he can do. They're going to tell him that, they've figured everything out, so there's no reason to hide it anymore. And maybe, he could help with dismantling the station. So they find him at the docks where they had taken their little underwater observation tour, and they're telling him all this stuff. But he's kind of got, a heavy heart with all this, and he kind of fesses up. He had only kind of partially told them the truth before. He told them, the whole story this time of how when the Empire came to strike up a deal for the Carnium and he refused them, they ended up crashing that station, that black tower, into the moon. So it was some sort of station that they could, fly out in outer space, and they just crashed it right into the moon, right to where they thought it would be easiest to mine the Carnium. And Han was like, even still, they're still trying to mine it, even after, the Empire's gone. They won't leave now? And the Prime Minister tells him that he's being told by the Empire that everything's, operations as usual. He said that they told him that politics don't change their deal, and that they promised to pay their invoices and to leave, and that they would be actually leaving soon, that they had gotten orders to start wrapping things up. And Han and Leia are like, orders? From who? The Empire has been defeated. Who's still running things? It's not the Emperor and it's not Vader. So who is it? And they hear a woman's voice say, from me. And the Prime Minister says, this is Ambassador and Senior Commander Alicia Beck. And Beck walks up to Solo and she's like, ow, Solo, I've been waiting a long time to run into you again. You cost me a promotion. Now, I wasn't familiar with this history that Commander Beck and Han had. I tried to look it up, but I didn't quite get it. There's a Wikipedia on it if you want to look it up. But something along the lines, I'm not exactly sure at what point in the timeline this happens. It's sometime during the rebellion. Han and Chewie, they were, you know, running away from the Empire for some reason, and she was the one in charge of pursuing them, but they got away. And because she lost them, she didn't get this promotion that she was up for. So that's what she's referring to. So then Beck goes for her blaster. She is intent on killing both of them. She wants to kill Han for personal reasons. And she wants to kill Leia because that would look really good on her resume. So she starts blasting them. They have like a little shootout. Han and Leia didn't have blasters on them, but they dove behind some crates and there were some fishing harpoons there. So they were using those to defend themselves. So long story short, Han and Leia escape Beck's blasters by using a fishing vessel to get away. Now, when they submerged from the water, they met up with the engineer that the Halcyon had sent down. His name was Zalma. And they're talking to Zalma, and all of a sudden, the girl that had picked them up in the sled when they first got to the moon comes running up on the beast that had been pulling the sled. She's now just like riding it. And she tells them that there's actually a secret rebellion going on this moon trying to get rid of the Empire. And this girl's like, we need to get you guys hidden. So she ends up taking them to one of the fishing villages. Now, once they got there, Han and Zalma were talking. And Zalma told Han that, you know, the captain of the Halcyon had said that, you know, he's not going to be able to help them. And Han's like, well, why not? And Zalma's like, it's a cruise vessel. It's not a warship, and they're not warriors. They don't know how to, you know, handle combat in space with the Empire. And Zalma says to Han, he's like, well, what about the rebellion? Can't they help? And Han told him that, you know, Leia's been, you know, trying to get in touch with them, and they're sure that they'll help, but it's just gonna take a little bit of time to get in touch with them. They need to, you know, be secretive about it. Somehow they need to block the transmission so that the Empire won't hear their communications. And it's almost like, okay, well, you know, we need to figure out a way to get these people off of this moon. It's very unstable and it's not going to hold out for too much longer. And Zalma also told him that, you know, he thinks he's pretty confident that he can probably get the captain of the Halcyon to help with evacuations at least. Now, when Zalma and Han go back into the area where everyone is, he sees Leia talking with a bunch of the leaders of the resistance that's, you know, made up of these fishermen. And he sees them like looking at a bunch of plans that these fishermen had drawn up. And she points to somewhere on the plans and she's like, here, we attack here. We make them think that we're going for the core blaster, but really it's a misdirect. We're gonna go for the repulsor lifts that hold the whole thing up. So all through the night, they're making plans for their attack on the station the next day. Now later, Leia gets in contact with Mon Mothma. She's the leader of the rebellion, or one of them, and she confirms that they're going to send aid, but it's probably gonna take them a couple days to get there. So now it's time for the attack. Han, Leia, Zalma, and about a dozen of the fishermen, they all get into their underwater apparatuses, you know, the things that keep them warm, help them breathe. They have little jet propulsion things so they can move through the water really fast. They all get down into the water. So a majority of them, they go and they start dismantling and attacking one part of the station. But this isn't the point. The point of this is just to cause a distraction so that the rest of them can go and start to dismantle the repulsor lifts. So they were going to work in teams of two. One to cut through the repulsor lift's arm, and the other to cover them in case the battle got heated. They were to cut as deep as they could and then put some kind of an explosive or something into the cut, and that would, you know, fry out the unit. But then all of a sudden a bunch of stormtroopers in underwater armor, they come zooming out of the station. So Han gets to work using his hyperbaric welder to cut through the repulsor lift's arm while Leia covers him. So all around them there's all this chaos and fighting and blasters going off and bubbles and broken droid pieces floating around. And then all of a sudden they see that red glow again, like the station is charging up to fire. Now the team was able to cut all the repulsor lifts except for one. So Han and Leia, they try to swim over to this last remaining repulsor lift, and the team that's trying to cut it, they're trying to get over there to help them. But the fire is so heavy they can't get through, they can't get over to it. And then on top of that, repair droids start coming out from the station to repair the repulsor lifts that they had already cut. And Leia started to feel defeated. She kind of just, you know, hung there in the water and she didn't know what to do. Her mind kind of just stilled. And there had been times in her life where she had tried to use the Force for help, but it didn't work. So she didn't really make an effort to try to use it again or to try to control the situation in any way. She just quieted her mind. She thought of one word: help. Then all of a sudden, out of complete nowhere, an Edont, which is a very large sea creature, twice the size of the Millennium Falcon, came swimming up out of nowhere. And it started rushing towards the last repulsor lift that still needed to be destroyed. And it had a long horn that came out of like a beak area. And he used the horn to destroy this last repulsor lift. And when it completely broke, this creature used its tentacles to grab the station and pull it down to the bottom of the ocean. They just saw it fade to nothing. So this was great. When Han and Leia got to the surface, everyone was celebrating. Then Zalma came running up to them and he told them that, you know, he had figured out that the damage that the Empire had done to this moon was beyond fixing now, even though they had gotten rid of the station. And that the people still needed to be evacuated because this moon was going to split apart eventually. They also found out that as they were destroying the station from underneath, a portion of it detached and flew off into space. So what Leia had thought was the station charging up to fire was really it just kind of breaking apart. And she was pretty sure that, you know, Commander Beck and all the other Imperial higher-ups had retreated. But Zalma also told them that once it made it out into orbit, the Halcyon engaged it. And they were up there right now in orbit firing on this little detached shuttle space station thing that the Halcyon was much larger than. So the Prime Minister volunteered his personal shuttle so that Leia and Han could get back up to the Halcyon and help. So the three of them, Han, Leia, and Zalma, they took the shuttle, and when they got out into orbit, they could see the Halcyon and the Imperial station thing fighting each other. They also noticed that, you know, the part that had detached was a significant size. It was about half the size of the station, and it was the part that had all the firepower, of course. Now the Halcyon had defense cannons, but the Imperial station was a lot smaller and so a lot more maneuverable. And the Imperials were trying to jump to light speed, but the Halcyon had been able so far to block their ability to do that. But they also didn't know how much longer they could. So the Halcyon had its hangar open, and so Han was able to steer their little shuttle into the hangar, and then they all jumped out and they ran to where the bridge was, which is where the captain was kind of, running things from. So the Halcyon and the Imperials are exchanging fire for a while when all of a sudden, out of hyperspace popped about a dozen A-Wing fighters from Green Group 1, from the rebellion. They were there to help. And they surrounded the Imperial shuttle and detained it. And they fired at its engine over and over until they fried it. Now, they didn't want to destroy the shuttle because they didn't want to kill Commander Beck, because the rebellion leadership had some questions. So over the intercom came Green Group 1 saying that they were getting ready to board the shuttle, and then a few minutes later they said that they had everyone from the shuttle detained, and everyone on the bridge cheered. And of course, they're not out of the woods yet. Just then, Zalma and Kilad, they come running up and they tell the captain that the moon was more unstable than they had previously thought. They've been kind of like talking about this and figured it out. But Kilad had an idea, and that he thought that he could use the tractor beam from the Halcyon to restabilize the moon. So they get the Prime Minister on the holo projector, and Kilad explains everything, and the Prime Minister, he's on board if it's gonna save their home. And Kilad's like, oh great, this is excellent. So we just need to discuss payment. And everyone went silent and they're like, payment? You expect to be paid for this? And Kilad's like, well, yeah, of course. I've put a lot of time, research into this, and I didn't get to meet with my buyer at the end of the Halcyon trip on Sinjax. So Kilad throws out a number that makes the Prime Minister just like shake his head mournfully, and Leia's eyes pop out of her head. And the Prime Minister is just like, we can't pay that. He's like, the Empire had been blocking their trade for years and they just didn't have that kind of money. So Leia says that the Resistance would pay for it, or the New Republic that was forming. They would pay for it, but a much lower number. And when Kilad went to protest this much lower number, Han gave him a look like, and he accepted the offer. So Kilad and the other engineers, they dismantled the tractor beam from the Halcyon and they shuttled it down to Mordor's. So all the inhabitants of Mordor's were all up in orbit, either on the Halcyon or on rebellion aid ships or just, random shuttles. And the only people on the moon were Han, Leia, Zalma, Kilad, and a handful of fishermen to help install this tractor beam. So they drag it into the water, and then some of the fishermen get down into the water with it and they take it down to the seabed. Now, Han, Leia, Zalma, and Kilad, they're on the surface watching, monitors to make sure that it's working. They feel a burst of energy tremble under their feet, which is a good thing because it means it worked. Oh, so finally, Han and Leia, they go back up to the Halcyon, while Zalma decided to stay behind on the moon to kind of just, make sure things stayed in good working order and that this whole thing, played out and was working and was going to continue to work and keep this moon stable enough so that everyone could return living there. And the people of Mordors were slowly beginning to be shuttled back. So that night, Han and Leia, they were exhausted, of course, and they decided to stay in their room for some privacy. And at one point, Han, he leaves to go get them some dinner and to bring it back. And while he's gone, Leia is kind of, reflecting on what had happened under the water. Had that been the Force with the whole don't and stuff? She hadn't been trying to use the Force. She just kind of made room for it. She had asked for help rather than trying to force it. She wasn't sure, so she knew that she needed to talk to Luke soon. So when Han got back with their food, he put his arms around Leia and he said, I was just wondering, now that we've fought off the Empire again, saved a world again, and proved ourselves the heroes of the new Republic, I was just wondering, is it possible that we could, take our honeymoon? And then he opened his hand and there was a ring for Leia. And this made her very happy. She loved the ring. And then Han said to her, he's like, when are you just gonna admit that you like it that I'm a scoundrel? And Leia's like, well, maybe I do. And Han's like, I'm starting to think you're the rogue, not me. But he also said he could get used to this. And Leia said she could too. And then, fade to black. So yeah, that is the story, the Star Wars story of the Princess and the Scoundrel. So we kind of get to see what happened between episodes 6 and 7. So that was kind of cool. I liked that. There were a lot of, romantic parts, which I liked. The voice of Han, the way he spoke through this book, I thought was very accurate. The things that he said, I could hear, Harrison Ford's voice speaking these words in my head. And yeah, I thought it was pretty authentic to the mood of the original trilogy as far as like the relationships went. My envisioning of like the moon and stuff, that felt a little bit more like the newer movies, like the prequel trilogies and then the most recent trilogy, which I don't hate. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion. I don't hate the prequels, and I kind of like the most recent ones. Obviously, the original trilogy is my favorite. I mean, whose isn't? Anyway, so yeah, my recommendation, if you like Star Wars, I think you're gonna like this book. The only criticism that I have of it really is I felt like nothing really happened until about halfway through the book. Like nothing really kind of started to happen until they were on the Halcyon for a little bit and we started to see this kidnapping plot maybe showing up. That was when I started to really engage with the book. The first half, I mean, I liked it. It was nice, but it was very wordy and it felt like there was a lot of filler conversation. It was nice. It was, nice to be in the universe and hear people talking like that again, but not a lot of it ended up being, pertinent to the story. So yeah, that's the only criticism that I have, which isn't, much of one. So yeah, if you like Star Wars and you just like being in the universe, if you're someone who likes to go to Galaxy's Edge a lot just to feel the environment of Star Wars, then you'll probably like this book. So yeah, if you liked this video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up. It is how I know what kind of videos to make. Make sure and hit the notifications bell so that you won't miss another upload. I do my best to upload these book videos, these Beauty and the Bibliophile videos. Yeah, that's what I call it. But you know how life is. My schedule has gotten way off since the holidays and I'm trying really hard to get myself back in the swing of things. So hopefully that will happen soon. I'll try. But if you subscribe, you'll know when I upload another one, whenever that is. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. And that she and her new husband were going to be. Now licks can usually be, but Han's thinking, oh, this guy's annoying, but I'm gonna use his talking and as. Now he mentions to Han that he used to work for the because she had Then the Prime Minister, he kind of takes Leia by the elbow and he takes them straight to the ice. There's actually a secret rebellion going on their moon. So all the inhabitants of Mordor's were all up in order. So we get to kind of see what happened between episode 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So we kind of get to see what happened in between episodes 4 and 5. No. 4, 5.